Soviet troops move into the bunker, and they confirm not just the fall of the Third Reich, but the death of Adolf Hitler himself.
For nearly 8 decades, the world believed Hitler's underground bunker had been sealed forever, buried beneath Berlin and erased from history. But in 2024, a team of experts finally gained access. What they uncovered stunned even the most hardened investigators.
A team of French researchers was granted unprecedented access to fragments of his remains, including parts of his jaw and dentures.
The walls still stood. The air was still poisoned. But nothing could prepare them or the world for what waited inside. What was inside will shock you to the core.
The researchers confirmed that the teeth were indeed Hitler's, matched precisely against his dental records that had been preserved by his personal dentist.
The bunker beneath Berlin, a fortress buried by time. By early 1945, Berlin was collapsing. Soviet tanks were closing in, the Allied forces were bombing from above, and the once mighty Third Reich was on its knees. In the middle of it all, Adolf Hitler had already vanished from public view. Where was he? He was underground. Not metaphorically, he was literally sealed beneath the surface of Berlin, hiding inside a concrete fortress built to outlast the empire he knew was falling apart. The Führerbunker was not simply a shelter. It was a final control center, a heavily fortified command post buried under the Reich Chancellery. Its construction began in 2 phases. The first stage, called the Vorbunker, was built in 1936 to serve as a basic underground refuge. But that wasn't enough. As defeat became likely, Hitler demanded something stronger, deeper, and completely bomb-proof. The second phase began in 1943. This new construction required speed, secrecy, and total obedience. Thousands of tons of concrete were poured by forced laborers, including Soviet POWs and political prisoners pulled from nearby camps. Many were worked to death under brutal conditions. Food was scarce. Beatings were common. Guards reportedly shot workers who slowed down or collapsed. Hitler rarely visited the site during construction, but when he did, his rage was explosive. Engineers recall him screaming over ventilation flaws, shouting that the bunker must be strong enough to defy the apocalypse. When he saw one concrete wall was thinner than specified, he slammed his fist on the blueprints and threatened to execute the lead engineer if the error wasn't fixed. The final design went far beyond standard protection. The Führerbunker was buried 8.2 below ground, with reinforced concrete walls and ceilings over 3.5 meters thick. It could survive direct aerial bombardment. Its 18 rooms were arranged in tight corridors, sealed off by steel doors. It contained electric generators, water pumps, diesel fuel reserves, chemical toilets, and air filtration systems in case of gas attack. Hitler's personal quarters were fitted with an emergency exit, a study, and a private lavatory. The walls were lined with thick plaster to reduce echo. No windows, no natural light, only cold, enclosed survival. Once completed, the bunker became the final nerve center of a collapsing empire. Hitler moved in permanently in January 1945. Inside were Joseph Goebbels, Martin Bormann, Eva Braun, several SS guards, and a shrinking group of secretaries and aides. Hitler issued delusional orders to divisions that no longer existed. He screamed at his generals. He refused to accept reality. Everything was falling apart, but underground, he tried to control it all, like nothing had changed. In April 1945, just days before the Soviets reached Berlin, Hitler dictated his last will and testament. He married Eva Braun in a short midnight ceremony. On April 30, they killed themselves. Their bodies were only partially burned. When Soviet soldiers reached the bunker, what they found was chaos, scattered belongings, bloodstains, and silence. The Soviets tried to destroy the site in 1947 with explosives, but much of the structure survived. Later, East Germany built apartments over it, covered the entrance, and removed all public references to its location. For decades, no one was allowed to go back in. But in 2024, that changed. A modern team of researchers was finally granted access to the preserved remains of the Führer bunker. What they found shocked even the most hardened experts. But while the world tried to forget, the bunker remained. What exactly was buried beneath Berlin, and why was it kept sealed for so long? Sealed in silence, the bunker's post-war cover-up. The war ended, but the silence around Hitler's bunker began immediately. In May 1945, Soviet forces took full control of the bunker site. Officially, they were securing the area. In reality, they were erasing it. Within days, Soviet teams descended into the collapsed remains of the Führer bunker. They photographed bloodstains, gathered bone fragments, and collected documents. But what exactly did they take? And why did they never release most of it? According to Soviet records, Hitler's burned remains were recovered, analyzed, and later burned again. But these records were inconsistent, delayed, and in some cases, deliberately misleading. Why did Stalin himself refuse to confirm Hitler's death to the world even after internal Soviet investigations strongly indicated he was dead? Why did he allow rumors to spread that Hitler might have escaped? In 1945, Soviet investigators reportedly removed not just personal items, but classified files, coded communications, and a number of small boxes containing unknown contents. None of these items have ever been seen again. By 1946, the Soviet secret police, and later the KGB, had sealed the area and declared the site off-limits. According to declassified East German intelligence files, several KGB officers remained stationed in Berlin throughout the late 1940s for one purpose: bunker suppression. Some reports suggest they were ordered to extract Hitler's final correspondence. Others claim something else was found, something not even the Soviets wanted the world to see. Years later, German construction workers discovered a hidden chamber connected to the bunker that had not appeared on any of the known blueprints. It had been sealed from the inside. Soviet accounts never mentioned this chamber. No photographs of it exist. Why was it ignored? Was it overlooked? Or was it hidden on purpose? German military engineers who had worked on the original bunker construction later told Western journalists that not all rooms had been entered by Soviet troops. They described locked steel doors and internal compartments designed to be completely airtight. But Soviet reports stated that all areas had been cleared. So who was telling the truth? By the 1970s, the East German government began a more aggressive effort to wipe out the physical traces of the site. Bulldozers were brought in to remove the remaining above-ground structures. The original entrance was filled with concrete and rubble. The location was intentionally misrecorded in state archives. Apartments were built over the area, and maps were edited to omit the exact coordinates of the bunker. There were no signs, no memorials, no warnings. The government wanted the public to forget it ever existed. They claimed it was to prevent the area from becoming a gathering point for neo-Nazis. That explanation made sense on the surface, but if that were the only reason, why the secrecy? Why the conflicting reports? Why did no one ever account for the items removed by the Soviets? Why did the East Germans ban even academic study of the site? In 2024, modern researchers were finally allowed to enter what was left of the sealed structure. What they discovered was not just a ruin, it was something the world was never meant to see. If everything was already taken, what were they so desperate to keep hidden? What came next would only deepen the mystery and turn stomachs. Unmarked graves and scratched walls, the ghosts below. When Soviet forces secured the grounds above Hitler's bunker in May 1945, they quickly sealed the area from outside access. Yet even then, rumors began spreading among the soldiers who first went in. Several claimed that while clearing collapsed sections near the bunker's tunnel, they uncovered human bones scattered in the rubble. Some said the remains looked like those of officers, identifiable by scraps of uniform fabric clinging to the skeletons. Others swore they saw smaller bones, possibly from children. None of these accounts ever appeared in official Soviet reports, but the whispers circulated among troops long after the war ended. Were these truly the unrecorded dead of Berlin's last stand, or did the Soviets suppress details that contradicted their version of events? Further contradictions came years later. In the 1970s and 1980s, East German construction crews tasked with urban redevelopment over the bunker spoke cautiously of what they encountered. One worker later told a journalist that sections of the wall were covered with scratch marks. He believed they had been made not by tools but by fingernails. In some places, he claimed, words in German were faintly visible: verloren, which means lost, and Gnade, which means mercy. Another worker insisted they were ordered to seal over a chamber that was never listed on the blueprints. According to his recollection, the room contained candle stubs arranged in a circle and a blackened stain on the floor that looked like dried blood. When he and his colleagues reported it, the response was silence. They were told to finish the job and never mention what they had seen. These claims cannot be confirmed, but they were not isolated. More than one East German resident living near the site described hearing strange sounds beneath the ground over the years. Some reported muffled voices. Others said it was the sound of screaming carried up through the pavement at night. The authorities dismissed such stories as superstition, but those who lived there avoided walking near the spot. Even today, some older Berliners insist the ground has an unnatural heaviness, as if what happened there had never really ended. Historians and psychologists who later analyzed these reports described them as a reflection of the terror and despair that gripped the city in 1945. One specialist called the bunker a psychological sinkhole, a place where the final madness of the regime was burned into the walls. Whether the scratches, bones, and hidden chamber were real or fabricated, the fact that so many people believed them gave the bunker an aura of dread that never disappeared. These stories, hidden for decades in whispers and scattered testimonies, became part of the legend surrounding the bunker. They were the fragments of memory that suggested something darker had been sealed below Berlin. And it was precisely these rumors that decades later helped push modern experts to demand entry and search for answers that official history had long avoided. With the emotional temperature rising and pressure building, modern teams finally made their way into the dark silence. And what they found was worse than imagined. First entry in 79 years, a descent into rotting history. It started with a hole barely wide enough to send a drone. The entry team had located a partially collapsed access shaft under a crumbling sidewalk near the old Reich Chancellery site. After months of negotiation and planning, they finally had permission to go in. But they could not enter immediately. The air inside had not moved in nearly 8 decades. Before a single human stepped through, they sent in a robotic crawler equipped with a 4K camera, thermal sensors, and chemical detectors. Within minutes, the device confirmed what many feared. The space was structurally unstable. the atmosphere was toxic. Still, the team pushed forward. Once the passage was reinforced and ventilated, the first group of experts entered the Führer bunker on foot. Even with protective suits and breathing apparatus, the experience was overwhelming. The stench was immediate. Mold coated nearly every surface. The walls were wet to the touch. Ceiling beams had collapsed in multiple corridors, forcing team members to crawl in some areas. Pools of stagnant water had collected on the floor. The temperature was unnaturally low. It felt like the building had sealed itself in rot. Then they reached the preserved chambers. What they saw there was worse. Some rooms were exactly as they had been left in April 1945. Metal-framed cots still sat in position. A cracked table held rusted utensils and what looked like a fossilized ration tin. On one wall, a map of Berlin hung in pieces, peeled and discolored, but still recognizable. In a corner of Hitler's personal quarters, the team found a simple cot with an old wool blanket. The fabric was darkened with what appeared to be a dried blood stain near the headrest. The sheet was untouched. The air quality was so hazardous that the team had to rotate in and out every 15 minutes. Spore readings were 10 times above safe levels. Chemical residue in some areas suggested lingering traces of explosive material or poison. The floors were unstable in several rooms, and in others, the walls had begun to collapse inward. But none of this stopped the documentation. Every room was photographed, every object catalogued, every inch of the structure scanned and recorded. The emotional effect was immediate. One historian vomited upon seeing the cot. Another stood frozen in place for nearly 10 minutes. A structural engineer broke down after crawling through a narrow corridor and emerging into the communications room, calling it a descent into death. Others described the silence as unbearable, as if the building was still listening. Was this what evil leaves behind? A space frozen in its own failure, too stubborn to decay completely? Yet these horrors were only surface level. What was buried deeper inside the Führer bunker would shake even the most hardened historian to their core. Inside the bunker, what was found will shock you. When the team reached the deepest rooms of the Führer bunker, they found a disturbing stillness that felt calculated. These were not just the final physical spaces of the Nazi regime. They were the last environment Adolf Hitler personally controlled. As the experts began their inventory, the shock came not from what was missing, but from what had remained untouched for nearly 80 years. The leaders' quarters were located at the far end of the bunker, sectioned off by thick steel doors. The first thing discovered was the fragmented remains of Hitler's desk. Its surface had been shattered, possibly by collapse or blast shock, but parts of it were still recognizable, including a cracked drawer containing burned paper scraps. Scattered across the floor were torn maps. One showed Berlin with hand-drawn notations in red pencil. Another map depicted a post-war Europe, marked with lines dividing territory between the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. This suggested that Hitler had already accepted defeat and was obsessively tracking what would come next. Hanging crooked on the wall was a shattered portrait of Frederick the Great, one of Hitler's personal heroes. It lay tilted, its glass broken inward as if struck during a violent moment. The most disturbing object in this room was the decayed frame of a couch. Mold covered most of it, and the center cushion sagged in. Near the upper edge, investigators found a dark stain that initial testing confirmed was blood. Experts believe this was the location where Hitler and Eva Braun took their lives on April 30th, 1945. Nothing about it looked ceremonial. It looked sudden, chaotic, and final. The communications room, located several meters away, had collapsed in part, but much of its contents were still accessible. Tangled wiring hung from the ceiling. Burned-out radio components sat in piles along one wall. Near the far side of the room was a metal cabinet, sealed shut. After forced entry, it revealed stacks of Morse code transmission logs. Most were dated April 28 to 30, and many were marked classified. The final transmission, according to translators, was chilling in its clarity. It read, "No departure. End procedure confirmed." This was seen by several analysts as a final admission. Hitler never intended to flee. He had planned to die in place. The personal items recovered added a layer of emotional horror. On a nearby table, experts found several dented ration tins marked April 28th. A pair of partially smoked cigarettes rested in an ashtray fused to the surface by humidity and time. Beside them was a pair of wire-rimmed glasses that matched Goebbels's prescription records. In a corner of what was believed to be the staff quarters, investigators found a child's stuffed rabbit. It was faded, missing an ear, and stained with what looked like dried blood. Experts could not confirm the owner, but many believe it may have belonged to one of the Goebbels children, who were killed by their parents inside the bunker. But uncovering physical remains was not enough. To understand what they truly meant, experts had to decode the psychology and symbolism behind every artifact. Expert analysis: what the artifacts reveal about Hitler's mindset. Once the physical contents of the bunker were retrieved and catalogued, the question quickly turned from what was found to why it mattered. The objects left behind were not just remnants of a collapsed regime. They were the final pieces of a psychological puzzle. Forensic specialists, military historians, and trauma psychologists worked together to reconstruct the mindset of the men who lived and died inside those walls. What they uncovered painted a disturbing picture of obsession, delusion, and a planned descent into death. One of the most important confirmations came from the bloodstains found on the couch in Hitler's quarters. Multiple samples were tested, and the results were conclusive. The blood contained high levels of cyanide as well as traces of barbiturates. This matched long-standing reports that Hitler took a cyanide capsule before shooting himself. These findings also supported eyewitness accounts that Eva Braun died by poison alone. Chemical residue on nearby surfaces confirmed the presence of fast-acting nerve agents, likely brought in by Hitler's medical staff. For investigators, these samples were not just biological evidence. They were proof that suicide had always been part of the plan. Psychologists analyzing the bunker's layout and contents pointed to extreme levels of micromanagement. Every room had identical ration inventories, perfectly organized. Furniture was placed at specific angles. Documents were filed meticulously, even during the final days. One expert described it as order in the middle of collapse, suggesting that Hitler clung to control over minor details as the larger world unraveled around him. This obsessive behavior was consistent with Hitler's known personality, but it was magnified in the face of defeat. More chilling were the red markings found on the wall maps. Several showed Soviet troop movements closing in on Berlin, with red arrows pointing at counterattack plans that no longer made tactical sense. In the margins of one map, analysts found handwriting confirmed to be Hitler's. It read, "Sie werden nicht überleben. They will not survive." These words were written near the symbol for Berlin's city center. Was this a reference to the Allies? Or was it a message for his own people? Either way, it revealed a leader still fighting battles that had already been lost. The psychological analysis grew darker when experts reviewed notes and markings from the final week. Several showed increasing signs of religious fixation. In what appeared to be Hitler's handwriting, phrases were found that compared Germany's collapse to divine punishment. There were also references to final purification, language that echoed his earlier ideological speeches, but now read like fatalist scripture. One analyst described it as messianic delusion, suggesting Hitler saw himself as a martyr who had to fall with his nation. Perhaps the most disturbing documents came from pages believed to be written by Joseph Goebbels. These handwritten notes describe the decision to kill his 6 children, not as an act of fear, but as a twisted form of mercy. In one line, he wrote, "They will never live under Jewish vengeance." The handwriting was confirmed, the meaning chillingly clear. These insights should have put all speculation to rest, but instead, they reopened one of the myths and conspiracies. Conspiracies, doppelgangers, and Soviet deceit. The evidence gathered from the bunker should have closed the book on Adolf Hitler's final moments. The maps, the transmission logs, and the remains all pointed to one conclusion: Hitler died in that bunker. But the story did not end there. In fact, it was just beginning. The moment the Soviets took control of the site in 1945, they planted the seeds of confusion. Instead of confirming Hitler's death to the Allies and the world, Stalin personally suggested that Hitler may have escaped. That claim was not made in secret. He told it directly to U.S. President Harry Truman and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Why would the leader of the Soviet Union refuse to confirm what his own investigators already knew? By mid-1945, Soviet troops had recovered partial remains believed to be Hitler's, including skull fragments and dental evidence. Yet none of this information was made public. Instead, Soviet media pushed stories claiming that Hitler had fled to Spain, Argentina, or even Japan. State propaganda implied that he had escaped using underground tunnels or secret aircraft. These false leads spread rapidly. Western intelligence agencies were flooded with reports of sightings around the world. Some said he was living in South America under a new identity. Others insisted he had undergone facial surgery and disappeared in Asia. The Soviet silence allowed these theories to take root. By the 1950s, the idea that Hitler used a body double to fake his death had become widespread. Several witnesses near the bunker claimed the body they saw being burned was not Hitler's. Others described a man who resembled him but had different physical features. Without official confirmation from the Soviets, even respected journalists questioned the narrative. The lack of public forensic records gave conspiracy theorists space to invent alternative endings. It was not until decades later that the real evidence was quietly acknowledged. In 1968, Soviet officials admitted they had recovered dental remains that matched Hitler's known dental X-rays. These X-rays had been secretly obtained from Hitler's personal dentist. Even then, the Soviets refused to release photographs or detailed analysis. It was only after the fall of the Soviet Union that independent researchers gained access to the jaw fragments. In the early 2000s, Russian officials allowed Western forensic scientists to examine the skull and jawbone. The results confirmed the match. Yet, by then, the conspiracy theories had already spread too far to contain. The situation was made worse by the actions of neo-Nazi groups who clung to the idea that Hitler had survived. Online forums and underground publications pushed alternative histories, many of which claimed the bunker was a hoax. These false narratives were recycled in books, documentaries, and even popular entertainment. The more evidence emerged, the more the conspiracies multiplied. Why would people refuse to believe what the facts made clear? The answer lies in something deeper than denial. Myths persist because they offer a sense of control. They allow people to believe there is always more to the story. And in the case of Hitler's death, the Soviet manipulation of truth made those myths impossible to kill. But as the final facts were exposed, one question remained. If the evidence was so overwhelming, why did some things still feel missing? Why did even the most thorough investigation fail to silence the echo of something darker? What this means for the world today. Now that the bunker has been entered, the world faces a choice. The team that went in retrieved physical evidence, psychological insight, and historical proof. What they did not retrieve was closure. There is still no official plan to turn the site into a public memorial. Germany's government has not released a full report. Some leaders argue that exposure could inspire the very extremism it seeks to prevent. Others warn that continued silence only strengthens conspiracy movements already distorting the past. The unearthed rooms, stained documents, and preserved personal objects have become more than historical evidence. They are now political flashpoints. Historians who were part of the excavation say the bunker should not remain in limbo. They argue that leaving it untouched again would only allow denial to evolve. They recommend a controlled and secure exhibit, one focused entirely on education, not spectacle. A place that shows what was real and what was destroyed to keep it hidden. The materials pulled from the bunker may be fragile, but the message they carry is not. What was uncovered cannot be ignored. The artifacts, the documents, and the evidence speak louder than any rumor ever could. The question now is whether the world will confront the full weight of what was found or continue looking away. History does not disappear just because it makes people uncomfortable. If the truth remains locked in academic reports and behind closed doors, its lessons will fade. And when that happens, the same mistakes have a way of finding their way back. What do you think about Hitler's death? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Want more videos like this? Then subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening stories. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. See you in the next video.